Welcome to Harding Instruments. Today we will introduce the MicroComm DXL digital intercom system. The MicroComm DXL intercom system is designed for correctional institutions and will provide all of the audio capabilities that you will need as part of your overall security system. We'll start with the head-end building block components of our system. Our MicroComm DXL system is designed to allow a small distributed system all the way through a very large, again still distributed system. The main building block components of our DXL system is this first component here, which is called the MicroComm DCC, Digital Communications Controller. The controller is the heart of the DXL system. It provides the control capabilities and it provides Ethernet inputs for control from your control system and also for control of voice over IP devices such as voice over IP masters, voice over IP intercoms, or voice over IP paging. The DCC is the main component. You need to have at least one DCC in your system which provides the control. In each equipment room, the DCC will provide up to 2 analog master stations, up to 32 analog intercom stations divided on 2 station cards, or SCC cards. Along with that, if you have a master card, you also have additional inputs and outputs for line level inputs, such as music sources, line level outputs, such as external paging outputs, or call recorder outputs, and some additional relay outputs for controls of lights or other types of I/O, as well as additional switch inputs for additional push buttons throughout the facility. If you need additional intercoms or masters in the same control room, you would add an expander or a DCE, Digital Communications Expander. The expander, as you notice, does not have a display or a keypad on it because it uses the control from the controller. So the expander just provides additional inputs and outputs for analog masters, analog intercoms. And if you have a master card, you can add additional line level outputs, line level inputs, and relay outputs and switch inputs. If you need high power paging on your system, we have another expander called a talkback expander, or TBE. The talkback expander provides additional paging outputs. There are 8 paging outputs on a TBE or talkback expander. So most of your head-end equipment will be divided among the controller and additional expanders, DCE expanders, TBE expanders, and we have another expander that looks exactly like a TBE called a page zone expander, or PZE, which is simply a bank of relays that you can use to switch paging from a high power paging output amplifier to up to 18 zones. So each equipment room will have one DCC and up to 4 expanders, such as a DCE expander or a TBE expander. Combined total of 4 of these units in total. If you need additional outputs, then you can add additional controllers and additional equipment. So if you needed more outputs in the same equipment room, you would order an additional DCC controller and possibly additional expanders to put in the same room. If you have a distributed system with multiple equipment rooms, each equipment room would have a DCC communications controller and other expanders as needed. If you're using voice over IP devices, you're not using the analog output ports for the masters or the analog output ports for the stations. In that case, you have a limit based on the amount of Ethernet traffic the controller can handle. Is you can have a limit of 13 intercom IP masters per exchange. So the DCC has the Ethernet ports, so 13 per complete exchange. It doesn't matter if you add any expanders, they're not going to add additional Ethernet capacity on it. So it's 13 IP masters per exchange. There is no theoretical limit of IP stations per exchange, but in general we recommend 200 or less to make the system lightly loaded. Looking at the back of the head-end equipment, this top unit is the controller, and this bottom unit is expander. So the DCC controller, we'll start with, has the main control of the system. As such, it has an Ethernet port. That's for communication between different DCCs, communication to voice or IP masters, and communications to your control system. Optionally, we also have a couple of serial ports that are also used can be used for a serial port control from your control system, or it can be used to control a serial port based camera system or CCTV system. It has USB ports on the back to communicate with the expanders on the system. I'll get into that just in a short bit. If you have masters on your system, you're going to have a master card on top where you would have your master connection, which can connect to two masters with a cable. That will go to a terminal block, which ultimately will go to your masters. You have some line level inputs, 2 line level inputs, and 2 line level outputs. And you have 4 relay outputs and 4 switch inputs that you can use for additional purposes. For adding analog intercom stations, we have 2 station card slots. Slot number 1 on the bottom and slot number 2 on the top. So the station cards, or SCC cards, are where you would hook your analog intercoms to. The bottom station card, or SCC1, will be stations 1 through 16 on this unit. The top station card, or SCC2, will be stations 17 through 32. If you need more than 32 intercoms, that's where you would need to add expanders. So the intercoms don't connect directly to the back. Instead, you connect a cable that would go to a quick connect block. A quick connect board is simply a board that has terminal strips hook up to your intercom stations. There's 3 terminals per intercom station, a plus, a minus, and a shield. And then you have a connector that will plug into the opposite of this cable. If you need more than 2 analog master stations or 32 analog intercom stations, that's where you would add additional DCE, digital communication expanders. It has the same input and output capability as a controller, minus the actual control portion. So you will see that there is no Ethernet connectors or serial port connectors. You will see USB connections. I'll get into that just in a little bit. And you will see the exact same MasterCard connections if you have a MasterCard installed, and the exact same station card connections. Now these DCC and this DCE have what we call 400 series intercom, which is our Harding specific intercom that has 2 wires, or 1 pair of wires going to it. That intercom wiring will handle both the switch and the audio and an LED on the same pair of wires. If you're using our intercom system as a retrofit using existing intercoms, the wire pairs, you'll need 2 wire pairs, one for the intercom speaker and one for the switch. In which case, you'll have 2 connectors on each station card. One connector for the speakers and the second connector for the switches. In this case, we have no switch connector because this is a 400 series intercom system that we're showing here. To connect the digital communications controller to the digital communications expander, we use a simple USB cable. On the controller, there are two USB Type A sockets, very similar to what you would have on a PC computer. And the connector is a standard USB cable. On the expander, you also have USB connectors on it. One, which is a USB Type B, which is a square style connector, and that's from the cable that goes to the DCC. So the DCC cable will plug into the USB Type B connector. As soon as I find which way it goes, there it is. And that's how the controller sends control signals to the expander through USB. The expander also has two additional ports on it, so you can add additional expanders. If you remember what I mentioned earlier on, is the controller can control up to 4 expanders, which can consist of DCE expanders and TBE expanders. There are only 2 sockets on the DCC, so to get more than 2 expanders on the system, you plug the first expander in the first slot, you plug the second expander in the second socket, and now you're full up. You can't add any more expanders to the back of the DCC. That's where these extra sockets on the back of the DCEs come into play. Your third expander would plug into the back of your first expander. And your fourth expander would plug into the back of the second expander. Due to how the system sends information through the USB ports, you can only have a maximum of 2 expanders connected to any one specific port on the DCC. So they can't be changed. You can't take the controller to expander number 1, expander number 1 goes to expander number 2, expander number 2 goes to expander number 3. The third expander in the chain that's on the same port on the DCC isn't going to work. So you have to make sure that you route your cables accordingly. So that's the basic connections you would have on your head-end equipment. Now I'll get into some more field devices that work with the DXL system. Starting with our master stations, our most common master stations are what we call our TMM modules, or touchscreen master modules. Now you see that we have 3 touchscreen style masters. What basically is, there's a gooseneck with a speaker and a microphone and a talk button, or PTT button. Our most popular touchscreen master modules is our TMM-641 IP-based touchscreen master module. So this module connects via Ethernet to our system. It has the microphone, speaker, push to talk, volume control. There's a headset jack on the front. And looking at the back has 2 Ethernet ports. So it has a Ethernet port for power over Ethernet, and then a second Ethernet port so that you can hook up, say, a second master or a second Ethernet device with the same input cable without needing a switch. So there's a 2-port mini switch built into our master stations. There's an additional jack for a telephone handset if you need to have a handset on your master station. And in this case, this is a TMM-640. It has a line level output. And if you don't have power Ethernet, we also have a AC adapter jack. You can power that with AC rather than a power Ethernet. Our TMM-641 adds an additional jack for a microphone input output. This is by far our most common master station. You can identify an IP master station by having 2 Ethernet jacks on it. Going to the next popular master station. This is our TMM 441 master. The 6th series of equipment is our IP devices. So it's a TMM 640. 6 means this is an IP master station. The second master is the TMM 441, which is an analog master which connects to the master ports. It looks almost identical to the TMM 640 series of masters. It has a microphone, a speaker, push to talk, and a volume control, and it also has a headphone jack on the front. But if you look at the back has a slightly different connector layout. There is no Ethernet jack on the back of this master. Instead, you have a 9-pin DB connector, which is what you would connect up to your head-end equipment. Specifically, our master station needs 2 pairs of wires going through the master port. The actual wiring and diagrams and information on that will be covered in a later topic. And it also has a line level output connector. The line level output connectors in our masters is so that you can take a standard 1/8 inch jack and take it from our master station to a line level input on a PC computer, and then you can use your PC speakers as your master station speaker. So it will mute the built-in speaker and it will be going through your PC speakers. So that can be on the same set of speakers that all of your annunciation sounds and your alarm sounds for your system are played on. This third style of master is not really all that common anymore. This is our first touchscreen style master. And you'll notice it looks a little bit smaller and it doesn't have anything on the front. This is what we call our desktop speaker microphone. Unlike our master stations, which have some electronics in them for the IP electronics, and this one has an amplifier electronics, our desktop speaker microphone, or DSM, has no electronics in it. It is simply a microphone and a speaker and a talk button. Taking a look at the back of the DSM, is you only have a single connector, which is a 9-pin connector, which will have 6 wires in use. A speaker pair, a microphone pair, and a push-to-talk pair. Our other popular style of master is our IMS-640 or -641 master. And this is a standalone master that you can use. You can also use it with a touchscreen, so that it can still be used with a touchscreen, but because it has a keypad and display on it, you can use it as a standalone device in low use areas such as a staff room or a warden's office or a small control room that you might not have a full control console in, or administrator's office or something like that. So the IMS-640 has a built-in speaker and microphone. It has a handset, and along the back it also has a headset jack. It has a keypad display so that you can receive calls. They will show up on the display. In this case, this master isn't set up right now. You can dial out with the menu system or with the keypad, and it has some speed dial buttons along the side, so you can program certain intercoms, certain page zones, so that you can press the button and make a page zone announcement or connect to a certain intercom, which may be great for a master station, say in a holding area. You may have your holding cells programmed into your buttons, or a reception area, which you may have your miscellaneous page zones assigned to the buttons. And then in most cases, you would program the bottom button as a push-to-talk button. So rather than the push-to-talk on the TMM masters, you use the push-to-talk on the IMS masters. On the back of the IMS master, there are two Ethernet jacks. One Ethernet jack for power Ethernet, the other Ethernet jack for a pass-through. And you have your headset connector. There's also another connector which can be used for an optional foot switch push-to-talk. Starting with our stations, we have various types of stations on display here. I'll start with what we call our ICE-620. This is a 600 series intercom, so that means this is an IP device. It connects through an Ethernet cable. So this particular station has just one push button. We can have up to 4 buttons on an ICE-620 station. So 2 on a standard faceplate and then 2 on an enhanced station on an additional connector. The interface to the ICE-620 is an Ethernet cable. So you take your Ethernet from your DCC to a network switch, and from that network switch you would take an Ethernet cable to your intercom station device. You'll notice that the ICE-620 is a very complicated device. It has 2 circuit boards sandwiched together with all the electronics required for the audio and for the Ethernet communications. If you're using analog intercoms, then you may have a device such as our ICE-420. You'll notice that it looks very similar to the ICE-620, is that the metalwork is exactly the same. Our ICE-400 series intercoms can have 1 or 2 push buttons, and it may have an optional LED. The Ethernet stations can also have an LED on them. The 400 series intercoms can have 2 buttons, an LED, and the speaker all on the same wire pair. And that's through this circuit board on the back of the ICE. So the circuit board has some electronics to take the buttons, to take the audio and the LED, and multiplex them all on the same wire pair. The connection to the ICE is through this 4-pin connector. We're only going to use 2 pins on that connector. These stations are called an ICE-420, or the 2 in the 420 means it's a 2-gang station. It's too wide for a standard back box. We have intercoms that are 3-gang wide and intercoms that are 1-gang wide. These aren't very common, however. The last type of intercom I'm going to discuss is our 300 series intercoms. Our 300 series devices allow you to connect to a standard 25 volt audio intercom device or audio speaker device. This is a third-party, non-Harding 300 series intercom. If you look at the back of a standard 25 volt intercom, you have a speaker, a transformer, and no electronics. For your switch, you have a switch, and it's going to have another pair of wires going to it. So you can have 1 pair of wires going to the COM in and a voltage tap on this transformer, and the second pair of wires going to the switch. This would terminate on what we call a 300 series station card or SCC card. They'll have 2 pairs of wires. You'll have 2 quick connect boards, one for the switches and one for the speaker. Transformer output will go to your speaker quick connect board, and the switch will go to the switch quick connect board. which will only have 2 layers of terminals, just a switch and a common. We provide our own 300 series intercoms called our ICE 320. So this is the 2-gang ICE 320. If you look at the back of the ICE 320, depending upon the specific type of intercom, it may just have a speaker and transformer like the other one, or it may have a small circuit board that has no components on it other than just the transformer. So this is just a speaker and transformer. Even though there is a circuit board on it, there's no real electronics on it. Our intercoms would terminate with a 4-pin connector. In this case, you're going to need all 4 pins. 2 for the speaker and 2 for the switch. Lastly, I'll just go over one quick difference here. This is our ICM series intercom, ICM-420. It is functionally identical to our ICE-420. But you notice there's a little bit of differences between the two with regards to the switch. The switch on an ICE is a switch mounted on the faceplate, while the switch on an ICM is actually going through a plunger to the actual circuit board. So the switch is actually mounted on the circuit board. The main difference is the ICM was our original intercoms, and the ICE are a cost-reduced version of them. So it has a cost-reduced version of the circuit board, and the switch, being a commodity switch that you mounted straight on the faceplate, is also a cheaper and more economical than the switch that we use with a separate plunger with a switch on the circuit board. Almost all modern facilities that we would quote now would use the ICE for cost reasons. But some architects still specify our ICM stations, so those are still available if you need them. I hope that this has given you a quick overview of our Harding equipment so that you can identify what equipment you have or what equipment you would need for your future project or your current facility. If you have any questions regarding Harding intercom equipment, feel free to contact us at support@harding.ca. Thank you for your time.